something slipped, and it wasn't supposed to happen on camera. In the middle of what should have been a routine press conference for Outlander, Heughan paused just a second too long before answering a seemingly harmless question. The room didn't react at first, but Caitríona Balfe did. She turned toward him, her expression shifting ever so slightly, as if she recognized the direction he was about to go, and wasn't sure she could stop it this time. The atmosphere had been light just moments earlier. Laughter echoed across the room as journalists asked about favorite scenes, emotional goodbyes, and the legacy of a show that had defined more than a decade of their lives. Sam and Caitríona played their roles perfectly, offering thoughtful, polished answers that reflected years of media training and mutual understanding. But then came the question that changed everything. A reporter leaned forward and asked, "Was there ever a moment where the emotions between you two stopped feeling like acting?" It wasn't the first time they'd heard it, and under normal circumstances, they would have brushed it off with a joke or a well-rehearsed line. This time, however, something was different. Sam didn't laugh. He didn't deflect. Instead, he inhaled slowly, his gaze dropping for a brief moment before lifting again, not toward the reporter, but toward Caitríona. The silence stretched longer than it should have, just enough for the tension to become visible, almost tangible in the room. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, more deliberate. He admitted that after so many years, it became hard to separate what was real from what was written. The words hung in the air, unfinished, as if there was more he wanted to say but hadn't decided whether he should. Caitríona reacted instantly, but not in the way fans expected. She didn't laugh it off or redirect the conversation with her usual sharp wit. Instead, she pressed her lips together and glanced down, her fingers tightening slightly around the microphone. It was a subtle reaction, but it spoke louder than any denial could have. The room shifted. Reporters who had been casually jotting notes suddenly looked up, sensing something deeper beneath the surface. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every micro-expression, every pause, every flicker of hesitation. What had started as a promotional event was beginning to feel like something else entirely, something unplanned. Sam tried to recover, adding that long-running roles can blur lines, and that actors often carry emotional weight from their characters. It was a safe explanation, one that should have restored control. But the damage had already been done, because Caitríona still hadn't said anything to counter it. Instead, she finally looked up, meeting his gaze for just a second too long. It wasn't a co-star's glance, not the kind audiences were used to seeing in interviews or red carpets. There was something heavier in it, something that suggested history, something that hinted at conversations the public had never been allowed to hear. Another journalist quickly followed up, asking if there were moments they had to pull back during filming because things felt too real. This time, Caitríona stepped in, but her response felt carefully measured, almost guarded. She spoke about professionalism, about trust, about knowing boundaries, but she never directly contradicted what Sam had said. That hesitation didn't go unnoticed. Within minutes, clips of the exchange began circulating online. Fans slowed down the footage, analyzing every frame, every blink, every shift in posture. What stood out wasn't just what was said, it was what wasn't. The pauses, the looks, the absence of a clear denial all fed into a growing sense that something significant had just slipped through. Then came the moment that pushed everything over the edge. As the conference was wrapping up, one final question was thrown in, unexpected, almost careless. If you could go back and change one thing about your journey together, would you? It sounded harmless, even reflective. But Sam's reaction was immediate. He didn't hesitate this time. He smiled, but it wasn't the easy, charming smile fans knew. It was softer, almost regretful. Maybe, not waiting so long to understand what it all meant, he said. The room fell silent. Caitríona didn't respond. She didn't laugh, didn't interrupt, didn't redirect. She just looked at him, completely still, as if the weight of that sentence had landed exactly where it wasn't supposed to. And in that moment, something shifted permanently. By the time the press conference ended, the narrative had already escaped their control. Online forums exploded with speculation, fan theories multiplied within hours, and one particular clip, Sam's pause, Caitríona's silence, was replayed millions of times. Then, just as the frenzy reached its peak, an anonymous insider post appeared. It didn't confirm everything, but it didn't deny it either. It simply stated, "What you saw wasn't accidental. Some things have been held back for years, and not everyone wanted them to stay hidden forever." And suddenly, what had seemed like a single awkward moment began to look like something much bigger. Something that may have been waiting a very long time to come out. If that moment felt accidental, the timing didn't. What made the situation even more unsettling was not just what Sam Heughan said, but when he chose to say it. After more than a decade of carefully maintained boundaries, of polished interviews and controlled narratives, why would something like this slip out now, right as Outlander was approaching its final chapter? For many watching, it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like something that had been building quietly for years, finally reaching a point where it couldn't be held back any longer. According to an anonymous insider claiming to have worked closely with the production team, the tension between Sam and Caitríona was never as simple as great chemistry. The source described moments on set where scenes didn't just feel emotional, they became emotional in ways that blurred the line between performance and reality. There were instances where directors allegedly called for retakes not because something was wrong, but because something felt too right, too personal, too revealing. Those details, if true, reshape how fans might interpret some of the show's most iconic moments. Scenes once praised purely for acting skill suddenly carry a different weight, as if what viewers were witnessing wasn't just storytelling, but fragments of something real leaking through. And for years, that possibility remained just out of reach, hinted at, but never confirmed. The insider went further, suggesting that there were periods during filming when the two stars deliberately limited their interactions off-camera. Not out of conflict, but out of necessity. There were boundaries they both knew they had to respect, the source claimed. Not just for themselves, but for everything around them, the show, their personal lives, the expectations placed on them. That pressure, over time, may have created a quiet tension beneath the surface. Maintaining the illusion of perfect co-stars while managing something more complex behind the scenes is not something that can be sustained indefinitely. Especially not when every glance, every interview, every public appearance is dissected by millions of viewers searching for meaning. What's even more intriguing is how their behavior in past interviews now appears different in hindsight. Moments where they interrupted each other, laughed a second too long, or suddenly shifted tone during certain questions now feel less like coincidence and more like controlled reactions, small efforts to keep something contained. And then there's the question of silence. At the press conference, Caitríona Balfe had the opportunity to shut everything down with a single sentence. She could have clarified, reframed, or dismissed Sam's comment entirely. Instead, she chose not to. That decision, more than anything else, is what continues to fuel speculation. Because silence, in a moment like that, isn't empty. It carries weight. It suggests hesitation, conflict, or perhaps an understanding that anything said could make the situation even more complicated. For many fans, that silence felt like confirmation, not of a specific detail, but of something deeper that has never been fully explained. As the clip continued to circulate, fan communities became divided. Some argued that it was nothing more than emotional reflection at the end of a long journey, two actors processing the closing of an important chapter in their lives. Others were convinced that what they witnessed was something far more personal, a rare crack in a carefully maintained narrative. But the most unsettling part came hours later, when a second insider post surfaced. This one was shorter, more direct. It wasn't about one moment, it read. It was about years of choosing not to cross a line, until it became impossible to pretend it wasn't there. That statement didn't provide answers. It raised more questions.